Millionaire pretends to become wheelchair-bound to test his wife, but it's the maid who truly loves him. Richard Thompson was lying on the floor of the entrance hall of his mansion in Beverly Hills, pretending to feel a pain he didn't have. The 43-year-old businessman had carefully planned everything in recent days after discovering suspicious messages on his wife's phone. "Help! Someone help me!" he shouted, making his voice echo off the marble walls of the house. It was Grace who arrived first, running from the kitchen area with her apron still tied around her waist. Her dark eyes filled with tears when she saw her boss fallen near the hardwood staircase. "Mr. Richard, what happened?" she asked, kneeling beside him. "I slipped on the stairs, Grace. I can't feel my legs," said Richard, controlling every word to sound convincing. The 32-year-old maid, who had worked in the house for 15 years, immediately grabbed the phone to call an ambulance. Her hands trembled as she dialed the numbers. Vanessa Thompson appeared in the hall only 10 minutes later, coming from the beauty salon where she was getting her nails done. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and she wore a red dress that accentuated her figure. Upon seeing her husband being attended to by paramedics, her first reaction was to check her own reflection in the hall mirror. "My God, Richard, what happened?" she asked, but her voice lacked the desperation Richard had expected. "A bad fall, ma'am," replied one of the paramedics. "We're taking him to the hospital for tests." At the most expensive private hospital in Los Angeles, Dr. Edward Wilson, a longtime friend of Richard, agreed to participate in the charade after hearing about the businessman's suspicions regarding his wife. The 50-year-old doctor had witnessed their marriage 8 years ago and had always noticed something strange in Vanessa's behavior. "Initial tests indicate a spinal cord injury," the doctor lied to Vanessa, while Richard pretended to be sedated. "We'll need more tests, but there's a possibility of paralysis in the legs." Vanessa absorbed the information in silence. Then, almost automatically, she asked, "Doctor, did he make a will? I mean, in case it's something permanent, who takes care of the business?" Dr. Wilson exchanged a quick glance with Richard, who kept his eyes closed. The coldness of the question took them by surprise, even though they expected something like it. "Mrs. Thompson, let's focus on recovery first," the doctor replied diplomatically. Grace remained by Richard's bedside throughout the night, refusing to go home even when Vanessa suggested she rest. The maid discreetly held her boss's hand, thinking he was unconscious, and whispered prayers softly. "You'll be all right," she said, in an almost inaudible voice. "I'll take care of you, don't worry." Richard felt his heart tighten upon hearing those words. He had known Grace since she was a 17-year-old girl who needed to work to support her sick mother in Inglewood. He had hired her even though she was inexperienced, something Vanessa always criticized. The next day, when Richard was discharged home in a wheelchair, Vanessa's first move was to call the travel agency. "I want to reschedule my trip to London," she said on the phone, not caring that her husband was listening. "Yes, for this very week. I need time to process all this." "Vanessa, aren't you going to stay with me?" asked Richard, testing her reaction. "Darling, I need to think. This is all very difficult for me too," she replied, avoiding his gaze. "Grace can take care of you better than I can. She knows all your preferences." Grace appeared in the living room at that moment, pushing a tray with Richard's afternoon snack. She had prepared banana bread, her special recipe that he always praised. "Mr. Richard, I brought your favorite snack," she said with a shy smile, "and I've already arranged the downstairs bedroom so you won't have to climb the stairs." "Thank you, Grace. You always think of everything," said Richard, genuinely touched by her care. Vanessa rolled her eyes discreetly and went upstairs to pack her bags. Richard pretended not to notice, but he was registering every reaction of his wife. That night, Grace set up a makeshift bed in the living room to sleep near Richard, in case he needed anything. She had brought from home a small old radio that played country music softly. "Grace, you don't have to sleep here," said Richard. "I have the bell if I need you." "Don't worry, Mr. Richard. I can't sleep at home knowing you're going through this," she replied, arranging the pillows. "My mother always said that when we care for someone with affection, half the healing is already done." Richard pretended to sleep, but stayed awake watching Grace. She checked every hour if he was breathing well, adjusted the blanket when he moved, and when she thought he was fast asleep, she gently touched his forehead to check for fever. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. The next morning, Vanessa came down with 2 large suitcases and a heavy handbag. Richard noticed she was wearing the pearl necklace he had given her as a gift for their last anniversary. "I'm heading to the airport now," she announced, giving her husband a quick kiss on the forehead. "I'll be back in 2 weeks." 2 weeks? "I thought you were only staying a few days," said Richard. "The psychologist said I need time to process the trauma of seeing you fallen like that," lied Vanessa. "Grace takes very good care of you." After Vanessa left, Grace approached Richard's wheelchair with a worried expression. "Mr. Richard, may I say something?" she asked hesitantly. "Of course, Grace, you can say whatever you want." Mrs. Vanessa took the jewelry from the bedroom safe. "I saw her putting it in her bag this morning," she said quietly, as if someone might be listening. Richard wasn't surprised, but pretended to be shocked. "Are you sure? Maybe she took it to store in the bank safe." "Mr. Richard, with all due respect, but you've known Mrs. Vanessa for 8 years. I've known her for 15. She wasn't going to store anything," said Grace gently but firmly. "A woman doesn't take jewelry abroad to store in a bank." Richard looked at Grace with renewed attention. She had always been observant, but he had never noticed how perceptive she was about people. "Grace, may I ask you something? What do you really think about my wife?" The maid blushed and lowered her head. "It's not my place to judge Mrs. Vanessa, Mr. Richard." "Forget the hierarchy for a moment. Talk to me as if we were friends," insisted Richard. Grace took a deep breath before answering. "Mr. Richard, in 15 years working here, I've never seen Mrs. Vanessa make a meal for you. I've never seen her take care of you when you had a cold. I've never seen her worry when you came home late from work," she said, pausing between each sentence. "But I saw her counting her allowance money 3 times a week. I saw her lying about where she was going, and I saw her speaking badly about you to her friends when she thought I wasn't listening." Grace's words hit Richard like a punch to the stomach, even though he had already suspected all of that. "And why did you never tell me any of this?" "Because it's not my place, Mr. Thompson. And because I thought you were happy," she said, her eyes welling up. "I only wanted you to be happy." At that moment, Richard had an unexpected revelation. Grace wasn't just speaking as a loyal employee. There was something deeper in her words, in her eyes, in the way she cared for him. During the following days, with Vanessa in London, Richard observed Grace more closely. She woke up at 5 in the morning to prepare coffee exactly how he liked it. She ironed his clothes, even when it wasn't necessary. She made excuses to stay in the same room as him, organizing things that were already organized. "Grace, do you have family? A boyfriend?" Richard asked one afternoon while she was tidying the bookshelf. "I have my mother, Mr. Thompson. She lives with me in Inglewood. As for a boyfriend—" She paused, wiping a book that was already clean. "I never had time for those things. 15 years without a boyfriend. That's not normal for a beautiful woman like you." Grace stopped what she was doing and looked at Richard with an expression he had never seen before. There was sadness, but also a deep tenderness. "Mr. Thompson, some people are born to love in silence," she said softly. "I always knew my place." The answer left Richard speechless. He was beginning to understand that Grace had been in love with him all those years, respecting his marriage and keeping her feelings to herself. On the 4th day, without Vanessa, the private physical therapist arrived for the first session. Dr. Charles was an experienced professional who had been hired on the recommendation of Dr. Wilson, who had already explained the situation. "Let's start with basic sensitivity exercises," said Dr. Charles, testing the reflexes in Richard's legs. Grace watched from afar, her hands clasped, as if she were praying for her boss to regain his movement. "Interesting," murmured the physical therapist. "Your reflexes are normal for someone with a spinal cord injury." Richard had to concentrate to not react instinctively to the stimuli. "Is that good or bad?" asked Grace, approaching. "Well, normally with an injury like the one described by Dr. Wilson, the reflexes would be more compromised," replied Dr. Charles, looking confused at Richard. "Every case is unique," Richard interrupted quickly. "Dr. Wilson said my injury has atypical characteristics." Grace noticed the sweat on Richard's forehead and immediately brought a towel to wipe it, as if the physical therapy session had been extremely tiring. "You're tired. I'll prepare your chamomile tea," she said affectionately. After the physical therapist left, Richard realized how Grace had protected his act without even knowing it was an act. She instinctively defended and cared for him. That night, Richard pretended to be asleep when Grace came to check on him. She approached the bed and stood still for a few minutes, just looking at him. "I would give anything for you to walk again," she whispered, thinking he couldn't hear her. "You deserve to be happy, Mr. Thompson. You've always been so good to me, to everyone. You don't deserve to be going through this." Richard felt an emotion he hadn't experienced in years. Grace loved him in a pure, selfless way that he had never encountered, not even in his marriage. On the 5th day, Vanessa called from London. Richard answered on speakerphone, and Grace was in the room organizing the plants. "Hi, love. How are you?" asked Vanessa, but her voice sounded distracted. "Better. Grace is taking very good care of me," replied Richard. "That's good. Listen, I've decided to extend my trip. I need more time to recover from the shock, you know?" said Vanessa. "I'm staying another 2 weeks. Richard noticed background noises on the call, music, male voices, laughter. "Where are you?" "Where? It sounds like there's a party there." "Oh, it's just the hotel television," lied Vanessa. "Well, I need to hang up. Kisses." Grace had stopped tending to the plants and was looking at Richard with an expression of contained indignation. "Mr. Richard, with all due respect, but this isn't right," she said after the call ended. "What isn't right?" "You're going through the worst moment of your life, and she's traveling, having fun. Any wife who truly loved you would be here taking care of you," said Grace with more firmness than usual. "Sorry to speak like this, but it's what I think." Richard smiled sadly. "And you, Grace? What would you do if you were my wife?" Grace turned red, but answered sincerely. "I wouldn't leave your side for a single minute. I'd sleep on the floor if I had to. I'd do anything to see you smile again," she said, then realized what she had said and turned even redder. "I'm sorry, Mr. Richard. I spoke too much." "Don't apologize. You spoke what you feel, and that's rare," said Richard, looking into her eyes. "Grace, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, Mr. Richard." "Why did you never marry? A woman like you, affectionate, caring, hard-working? Any man would be lucky to have you as a wife." Grace took a deep breath as if making an important decision. "Because I gave my heart to someone a long time ago, and I couldn't take it back, even knowing it was impossible," she said quietly. "And who is this person?" Grace looked at Richard with eyes full of unshed tears. "You know, Mr. Richard. You've always known." The confession hung in the air between them like a truth that had finally been set free. Richard felt his heart race in a way it hadn't for years. "Grace, you don't need to say anything, Mr. Richard. I know it's impossible. I just wanted you to know that there is someone in this world who truly loves you, without interest, without ulterior motives," she said, wiping a tear that escaped. "Now I'll go prepare your dinner." She quickly left the room, leaving Richard alone with his thoughts. For the first time in years, he questioned his life choices. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us, who are just starting out. Now continuing. The next day, an unexpected visitor arrived. Michael Thompson, Richard's distant cousin, whom he hadn't seen in 5 years, appeared at the mansion, wearing an expensive suit and driving an imported car. "Richard, I heard what happened. I came as soon as I could," said Michael, but Richard noticed he was looking more at the house and the furniture than at him. "Thank you, Michael." "I wasn't expecting your visit," replied Richard, suspicious. "Family is family, cousin." "We're here to help," said Michael, sitting in an expensive armchair and eyeing it appraisingly. "Actually, I came to talk about business. With you like this, it must be hard to manage everything." "I'm managing to work from home. Grace helps me with the things I need," said Richard. "Ah, yes, the maid. But Richard, let's be practical. A company of your size needs someone with experience to make important decisions," said Michael, taking an envelope from his pocket. "I brought a proposal for you to consider," Richard opened the envelope and could barely keep a neutral expression. It was an offer to buy 40% of the shares of his company for an amount that represented about 1/10 of its real value. "Michael, this has to be a joke, right? Richard, you need to be realistic. In your situation, it's better to secure something than lose everything," said Michael with feigned concern. "And let's face it, you'll need money for treatments, caregivers, home modifications." Grace entered the room just then to serve coffee and overheard part of the conversation. "Excuse me, Mr. Michael, but Mr. Richard doesn't need to sell anything," she said sharply. "He's recovering very well and I take care of everything he needs." Michael looked at Grace with disdain. "Richard, you need professional advice, not a maid's opinion," he said, emphasizing the last word as if it were an insult. Richard felt genuine anger, not pretended, for the first time in days. "Michael, Grace has more character in her little finger than you have in your entire body, and your proposal is offensive," said Richard firmly. "I think you'd better leave." "Richard, you're making a mistake. In your condition, you need people who think clearly," insisted Michael. "He's thinking very clearly," said Grace, positioning herself protectively beside Richard's chair. "And if you won't respect his decision, I'll have to ask you to leave." Michael laughed sarcastically. "A maid throwing me out of my own cousin's house? That's hilarious." "This is my house, and Grace speaks for me," said Richard categorically. "Get out, Michael." After Michael left, Grace was still visibly upset. "I'm sorry, Mr. Richard. I shouldn't have interfered, but I couldn't stay quiet seeing him try to take advantage of you," she said. "Grace, you defended me better than any lawyer would," said Richard, moved. "Thank you." "You don't need to thank me. I'll always protect you from anyone who tries to harm you," she said with determination. That afternoon, while Grace was preparing lunch, Richard called his lawyer, Mr. Franklin Reed. "Franklin, I need you to investigate some things for me," said Richard. "Of course, Richard. What do you suspect?" "I want to know everything about the transactions in the joint accounts between me and Vanessa, and I want to know who gave my address to Michael," said Richard. "I'll start the investigations right away. Richard, can I speak frankly?" "Always. Your true friends are worried about you, and some of us already suspected that Vanessa wasn't the woman she appeared to be," said Franklin. "If you need anything, you can count on me." 3 days later, Franklin called with the first findings. "Richard, the situation is worse than we imagined," said the lawyer. "Vanessa transferred $300,000 from the joint account to a personal account last week, and she was the one who gave your address to Michael. In fact, she was the one who reached out to him." Richard swallowed hard, even though he had been expecting something like this. "Is there more?" "She's staying at the most expensive hotel in London, in a presidential suite that costs £5,000 per night. And she's not alone," said Franklin hesitantly. "Just say it, Franklin." "She's with Brandon, her personal trainer. There are photos of them together on his social media, which, by the way, aren't very discreet," said Franklin. "Richard, she's not trying to hide anything." Richard hung up the phone and stood still in the living room, processing the information. Grace appeared with a cup of tea. "Mr. Richard, you look pale. Did something happen?" Richard looked at Grace and, for the first time since the pretense began, felt the urge to tell someone the whole truth. "Grace, can I trust you completely?" "With your life, Mr. Richard." "Sit here. I need to tell you something." Grace sat on the edge of the sofa, with the upright posture of someone accustomed to maintaining respectful distance. "Grace, I'm not paralyzed," said Richard directly. She looked at him, confused. "What do you mean, Mr. Thompson?" "I faked the fall. I faked the paralysis. I wanted to test how the people around me would react if I were in a vulnerable situation," explained Richard. Grace processed the information silently for a long minute. You can walk?" "Perfectly. And why did you do this?" Richard told her about his suspicions regarding Vanessa, about the messages on her phone, about how she had been behaving. "I needed to know if my wife loves me or loves my money," said Richard. "And now you know the answer," said Grace sadly. "Yes, but I discovered something I didn't expect," said Richard, looking into her eyes. "I discovered that there is someone who truly loves me. Someone who took care of me without expecting anything in return. Someone who defended me when others tried to take advantage of me. Grace began to tremble. "Mr. Thompson." "Grace, these last few days you have shown me what true love is, and I have started to feel for you something I never felt for my wife," said Richard. "But you are married, I am your maid." "This cannot happen," said Grace, standing up. "Grace, wait," said Richard, and then he did something that almost gave away the whole act. He stood up from the chair. Grace turned and saw Richard standing. Her legs trembled, and she had to lean against the wall. "Mr. Thompson, you're walking." "Grace, listen to what I'm going to tell you," said Richard, approaching her. "My marriage was over even before I faked this paralysis. I found out that my wife is cheating on me and is trying to steal my money. But I also discovered that the woman I should love was here all along, taking care of me, respecting me, loving me in silence." "Mr. Thompson, you are confused because of everything you're going through," said Grace with tears in her eyes. "I'm more clear-headed than I've been in years," said Richard, taking her hands. "Grace, do you love me?" "That doesn't matter, Mr. Thompson." "To me, it matters more than anything in the world," said Richard. Grace looked into his eyes and saw a sincerity that made her lower all her defenses. "I have loved you since the first day I arrived in this house," she said in a whisper. "But I always knew it was impossible." "What if I told you it's not impossible, that I want to try to build something real with you?" asked Richard. "And your wife?" "My wife will learn the truth about me, about herself, and about the consequences of her choices," said Richard determinedly. Grace was still in shock when they heard the sound of a car arriving. It was Vanessa, who had returned from London earlier than expected. "Quick, Grace, I'm going back to the chair. She can't know we've discovered everything yet," said Richard. Grace helped him sit in the chair seconds before Vanessa entered the room. The wife arrived tanned, with new clothes, and the appearance of someone who had had a lot of fun. "Hi, honey. I decided to come back early because I missed you," lied Vanessa, giving a mechanical kiss on Richard's forehead. "It's good that you're back," said Richard, watching her every move. "How are you? Have you improved at all?" asked Vanessa, but her eyes were already scanning the room as if checking if everything was in its place. "The same, but Grace has been taking very good care of me," said Richard. Vanessa looked at Grace with a mix of irritation and superiority. "Great. Now that I'm back, you can return to your normal duties, Grace. I'll take care of Richard," said Vanessa. "Mrs. Vanessa, I prefer to continue taking care of Mr. Thompson. I already know his entire routine, the times for his medicine," said Grace. "Grace, when I say something, it's not up for discussion," said Vanessa sharply. "You take care of the house. I take care of my husband." Richard intervened before the situation got worse. "Vanessa, Grace has been helping me a great deal. I don't see a problem with her staying," he said. "Richard, you need professional care, not a maid's pity," said Vanessa, emphasizing the word pity cruelly. Grace lowered her head and left the room without a word. Richard felt genuine anger growing inside him. That night, Vanessa insisted on sleeping in the ground-floor bedroom with Richard, claiming she wanted to take care of him. Grace set up her makeshift bed in the living room, but Richard could hear Vanessa whispering on the phone late into the night. "Brandon, I know you're angry, but I had to come back to avoid raising suspicions," Richard overheard. "Yes, I got the money. Let's wrap this up soon. Of course I love you. You know this marriage is just for convenience now." Richard recorded the entire conversation on his phone and in the morning called Dr. Franklin. "Franklin, I need you to prepare the divorce papers, and I want to sue Vanessa for embezzlement," said Richard. "I've been expecting this call." "I have other information that might interest you," said Franklin. "Vanessa hired a private nurse from a private hospital, a professional who costs $3,000 a day. She didn't tell me anything about that, because the nurse isn't for you. It's to investigate your real medical condition. Vanessa suspects you're faking," said Franklin. Richard fell silent. Vanessa was smarter than he had imagined. "Franklin, I need to speed up my plan. She's getting suspicious. What do you want to do?" "I want to gather the whole family and some friends here at the house to make an announcement. Say it's about my medical condition and the future of the company," said Richard. "And what will the announcement be?" "The truth, the whole truth. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out." Now continuing. The next afternoon the nurse arrived. She was a woman around 50 years old, with a professional appearance and an investigative gaze. Her name was Susan Miller. "Good afternoon, Mr. Thompson. I'm Nurse Susan. Your wife hired me to do a full evaluation of your condition," she said, opening a case full of equipment. Richard looked at Vanessa, who avoided his gaze. "What kind of evaluation?" "Reflexes, sensitivity, neurological responses. We're going to do a very thorough job," said Susan, starting to organize her instruments. Grace entered the room at that moment to announce that lunch was ready, and immediately sensed the tension in the air. "Excuse me, I'll serve lunch," she said softly. "Grace, you may stay. I want you to witness the evaluation," said Richard, knowing he would need a witness. Susan began the reflex tests. Richard needed all his willpower not to react to the stimuli. The nurse was being more rigorous than any previous examination. "Interesting," murmured Susan, repeating a test for the third time. "What is it?" asked Vanessa anxiously. "Mr. Thompson, do you feel it when I touch your legs?" Richard decided it was time to start planting doubts. "Sometimes I feel a strange sensation, like tingling," he said. "And when did this tingling start?" asked Susan. "Last night. That's exactly why Vanessa called you," lied Richard, looking at his wife. Vanessa was confused. She hadn't said anything about tingling. "Mrs. Thompson, did you mention that your husband was regaining sensations?" asked Susan. Well, he mentioned it this morning," stammered Vanessa. Susan continued the tests, but Richard could see she was finding inconsistencies between what she expected from a real paralysis and what she was observing. "Mr. Thompson, I need to run some more specific tests. May I use this device to measure nerve activity?" asked Susan, showing an electronic equipment. Richard knew the device would show normal nerve activity and decided it was time to start revealing the truth. "Susan, before we continue, may I ask you a question?" said Richard. "Of course. Do you really believe I'm paralyzed?" Susan stopped what she was doing and looked directly at Richard. "Mr. Thompson, in 20 years of practice, I've seen many cases of paralysis, and I can say you have the most atypical reflexes and neurological responses I've ever encountered," she said diplomatically. "Atypical how?" "Mr. Thompson, your responses are, well, too normal for someone with a spinal cord injury," said Susan honestly. Vanessa grew tense. "What do you mean by that?" "Mrs. Thompson, I need to speak with your husband alone," said Susan. "No, whatever is said, I want to hear it," insisted Vanessa. "Grace, could you call Dr. Wilson to come here?" requested Richard. Grace left to make the call, and Richard decided it was time to start putting his cards on the table. "Susan, I need to tell you the truth," said Richard. "Richard, what are you going to do?" asked Vanessa, growing increasingly nervous. "I'm going to tell Susan that I can walk perfectly well," said Richard calmly. The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa turned pale, and Susan looked from Richard to Vanessa, trying to understand the situation. "What do you mean, Mr. Thompson?" "I faked the paralysis to test some people around me," said Richard, staring intently at Vanessa. "I wanted to see how they would react if I became vulnerable." "Richard, you're joking, aren't you?" said Vanessa with a nervous laugh. "I'm not joking, Vanessa, and I discovered some very interesting things," said Richard. Susan quickly packed up her equipment. "Mr. Thompson, I think it's best if I excuse myself. This situation is beyond my professional expertise," she said. "Susan, wait. Who hired you?" asked Richard. "Your wife. And did she tell you exactly what to investigate?" Susan looked at Vanessa before answering. "She asked me to verify if your paralysis was real," said Susan hesitantly. Richard smiled sadly. "So, my own wife suspected I was faking, but instead of asking directly, she hired a spy." "Richard, I was worried. I wanted to make sure you were being well cared for," tried to justify Vanessa. "Vanessa, stop lying. We both know why you hired Susan," said Richard firmly. Grace returned at that moment. "Mr. Richard, Dr. Wilson is on his way," she said, then noticed the tension in the room. "Did something happen?" "Grace, you may stay. You need to hear this too," said Richard. Susan took advantage of the distraction to excuse herself, claiming she had other patients to attend to. When Dr. Wilson arrived, Richard asked everyone to sit down. "Everyone, the moment of truth has come," said Richard. "Edward, could you tell them about my real medical condition?" Dr. Wilson looked at Richard, questioning if he was sure, and Richard nodded affirmatively. "Vanessa, Grace, Richard never had a spinal cord injury. He is perfectly healthy," said Dr. Wilson. "What are you saying?" asked a confused Grace. "Grace, Richard asked me to pretend he was paralyzed to test some people," explained Dr. Wilson. Grace looked at Richard with an expression of hurt and confusion. "Mr. Richard, you deceived me too?" "Grace, I didn't want to deceive you, but I needed to be sure about some things," said Richard. "Sure about what?" asked Grace with teary eyes. "That there are people who love me for who I am, not for what I have," said Richard, looking alternately at Grace and Vanessa. Vanessa had remained silent, processing everything. "Richard, did you do all this to test me?" she finally asked. "Not just you, Vanessa, but you were the main person I needed to figure out," said Richard. "And what did you find out?" Richard slowly rose from the wheelchair, showing he could walk perfectly. "I found out that my wife is more interested in my will than in my health. I found out that she transferred $300,000 from our joint account to a personal account. I found out that she's having an affair with her personal trainer. And I found out that she's planning to leave me for him," said Richard calmly. Vanessa stood up abruptly. "Richard, let me explain." "Explain what, Vanessa? That you're not cheating on our marriage, that you didn't steal our money, that you didn't spend 2 weeks in London spending a fortune with another man, while I was supposedly paralyzed," said Richard, taking the cell phone from his pocket. "Or do you want to explain this?" Richard played the recording of Vanessa's phone conversation with Brandon. Her voice echoed through the room, confessing the extramarital affair and talking about money. Grace covered her mouth with her hands, shocked. Dr. Wilson shook his head negatively. "Richard, you don't understand. I love you, but our marriage was going through a crisis," tried Vanessa. "A crisis? Vanessa, you were planning to leave me as soon as you got full access to my assets," said Richard. "Your cousin Michael didn't show up here by chance. You were the one who brought him to try to convince me to sell my shares for peanuts. How do you know that?" "Because I investigated. And I found out that you two had an agreement. He would buy my shares cheap, sell them to a bigger company, and split the profit with you," said Richard. Vanessa realized she had been completely exposed. "And now? Are you going to sue me? Are you going to leave me on the street?" she asked angrily. "Now you're going to sign the divorce papers that my lawyer is preparing. You're going to return the money you took from the joint account. And you're going to get out of my life forever," said Richard. "And if I don't want to sign?" "Then I sue you for embezzlement, marital infidelity, and attempted fraud." "You choose," said Richard coldly. Vanessa looked at Grace with hatred. "This is all your fault. You've been filling his head against me," she shouted. "Vanessa, leave Grace out of this. She didn't know anything until today," defended Richard. "Oh, of course. The little saint maid who never did anything wrong," said Vanessa sarcastically. "I bet you're already planning to marry her as soon as you get rid of me." Richard looked at Grace, who was visibly uncomfortable with the situation. "Grace has nothing to do with the end of our marriage, Vanessa. Our marriage ended the day you decided to betray me," said Richard. "You're a hypocrite, Richard. You pretend to be paralyzed to test me, but you fall in love with the maid," shouted Vanessa. "The difference is that Grace took care of me without expecting anything in return." "You only thought about how to take advantage of the situation," replied Richard. Grace couldn't take the situation anymore and ran out of the room. Richard tried to follow her, but Dr. Wilson held him back. "Richard, let her process all this. She's in shock," advised the doctor. Vanessa picked up her purse and headed for the door. "You're going to regret this, Richard." "Maybe employers and employees just aren't meant to be," she said venomously. "Vanessa, you have 24 hours to leave the house. After that, I'll call security to remove you," said Richard coldly. After Vanessa left, Richard went looking for Grace. He found her in the back garden, sitting on the bench where she usually rested during work breaks. "Grace, can we talk?" asked Richard, approaching. "Mr. Richard, I think it's best if I leave," she said without looking at him. "Why?" "Because this has all become such a mess. Mrs. Vanessa is right about one thing. Employers and employees don't work out," said Grace. "Grace, look at me," requested Richard, sitting beside her. She raised her eyes, red from crying. "Grace, forget for a moment that I'm your employer and you're my employee. Forget social differences, money, anything," said Richard, taking her hands. "I am a man who has discovered he loves an incredible woman, and you are a woman who deserves to be truly loved. That's all that matters. But people will talk, Mr. Richard. They'll say I took advantage of the situation, that I'm a gold digger," said Grace. "And since when do you care what people say? The Grace I know has always known who she is, regardless of other people's opinions," said Richard. "It's different, Mr. Richard. This will affect your reputation, your business. Grace, I spent 15 years admiring your integrity, your kindness, your strength. Now that I can finally offer you my heart, are you going to run away because of other people's prejudice?" asked Richard. Grace was silent for a long time. "Mr. Richard, I love you. I have loved you since the first day, but I'm afraid," she finally said. "Afraid of what?" "Afraid that you're confusing gratitude with love. Afraid that when the dust settles, you'll realize I'm not the right woman for your life," said Grace. Richard held her face with both hands. "Grace, what I feel for you is not gratitude. It's love. A love that grew slowly, with admiration, with respect, with affection," he said. "And about you not being the right woman for my life, let me tell you something. You are the only right woman for my life." "How can you be so sure?" "Because in 15 years you have never disappointed me. Because you love me for the man I am, not for the money I have. Because you took care of me when you thought I was paralyzed without expecting anything in return," said Richard. "Grace, you are the bravest, most loyal, and most principled woman I know." Grace began to cry again, but this time from emotion. "I'm so afraid of not being enough for you," she said. "Grace, you are more than enough." "You are perfect," said Richard, kissing her forehead. "Will you give me a chance to prove that to you?" Grace looked into his eyes and saw a sincerity that reassured her. "All right," she said softly. "Let's try." Richard smiled and hugged her, feeling he had finally found his place in the world. "Grace, there's one thing I want to ask you," said Richard. "Anything. Stop calling me Mr. Richard. From now on, I'm just Richard to you," he said, smiling. "It will be hard to break the habit," said Grace, laughing for the first time in hours. "We have time for you to get used to it," said Richard. In the following days, Vanessa moved out of the mansion, taking only her personal belongings. Richard had the satisfaction of seeing her return the jewelry she had taken to London and sign for the return of the money that had been improperly transferred. The divorce was processed quickly, with Vanessa losing any right to asset division due to evidence of infidelity and embezzlement. During this time, Richard and Grace slowly built their relationship. He insisted that she no longer needed to work as a maid, but Grace asked for some time to get used to the new situation. "Richard, let me keep taking care of the house for now. It makes me feel more useful," she said. "Grace, you don't need to feel useful. You just need to be happy," said Richard. "Taking care of you and this house makes me happy," she replied. 1 month after the end of the marriage, Richard organized a dinner to introduce Grace as his girlfriend to his closest friends. She was extremely nervous. "Richard, what if they don't like me? What if they think I'm a gold digger?" she asked while getting ready. "Grace, my true friends will love you as much as I do," said Richard, helping her choose a dress. "And if someone doesn't like it, that's their problem, not ours." The dinner was a success. Richard's friends, who had known Grace by sight for years, were impressed by her intelligence, her manners, and her kindness. Dr. Wilson was the first to greet them. "Richard, you've chosen an exceptional woman," he said. "And Grace, you managed to find his true heart. You both deserve to be happy." Franklin, the lawyer, also approved of the union. "Richard, in all these years representing you, I've never seen you so happy and at peace," he said. "Grace, welcome to the family." 6 months later, Richard proposed to Grace. He planned everything down to the smallest detail, decorating the garden where she used to work with hundreds of flowers. "Grace, you've transformed my life," said Richard, kneeling in the middle of the garden. "You taught me what true love is. Will you marry me?" Grace cried with emotion and said yes. The engagement ring was simple but elegant, exactly as she had dreamed when she was younger. The wedding was intimate, with only the closest friends and Grace's mother, whom Richard made a point of meeting personally, and who adored her son-in-law. "Richard, thank you for making my daughter so happy," said Mrs. Margaret, Grace's mother. "I always knew she deserved a man of worth." "Mrs. Margaret, it's Richard who deserves it. Your daughter is an angel," replied Richard. 1 year after the wedding, Richard and Grace were walking through the mall when they ran into Vanessa. The ex-wife was working as a sales clerk in a clothing store, noticeably thinner and with a tired appearance. "Richard, Grace," greeted Vanessa, clearly embarrassed. "Hi, Vanessa, how are you?" asked Richard politely. "Fine, working, getting by," she replied, avoiding looking at Grace. "That's good. I hope you're happy," said Richard sincerely. Vanessa looked at Grace, who was radiant beside her husband, wearing simple but elegant clothes. "Grace, you're doing well?" asked Vanessa hesitantly. "I'm doing very well, thank you," replied Grace kindly, with no resentment in her voice. "Does Richard treat you well?" "He treats me like a queen," said Grace, smiling. Vanessa nodded, and Richard noticed regret in her eyes. "Richard, can I talk to you for a minute?" asked Vanessa. Richard looked at Grace, who signaled for him to go. "Vanessa, go ahead. I wanted to apologize to you for everything. You didn't deserve what I did," said Vanessa quietly. "Vanessa, that's all in the past. I hope you find your happiness," said Richard. "You found yours, didn't you?" she asked, looking at Grace. "I did," confirmed Richard, smiling. When they returned home that afternoon, Grace was thoughtful. "Richard, do you regret anything?" she asked. "What would I regret?" "Ending your marriage, marrying me, changing your life so much," said Grace. Richard stopped the car and looked at her. "Grace, do you know what I regret?" he asked. "What?" "That it took me so long to realize you were here all along, that I wasted 15 years married to the wrong person when the woman of my life was in my home every day," said Richard. "But if you had realized it earlier, maybe it wouldn't have worked out." "Maybe I wouldn't have been ready," said Grace philosophically. "That's true, maybe everything happened at the right time," agreed Richard. That evening, as they dined in the garden that was now officially theirs, Richard reflected on everything that had happened. "Grace, do you know what the best thing was that came out of all that pretending?" he asked. "What?" "Discovering that true love exists in the world, and that I was lucky enough to be loved like that," said Richard. "And I discovered that it's worth waiting for the right person, even if it takes 15 years, said Grace. "Do you think we'll be happy forever?" asked Richard playfully. "I think we'll be happy as long as we keep choosing each other every day," said Grace wisely. Richard took her hand across the table and looked at their wedding rings. "Then we'll be happy forever," he said. 3 years later, Richard and Grace created a foundation to offer vocational courses for housekeepers who wanted to change careers or start their own businesses. "I want other women to have the opportunities I had," said Grace at the inauguration of the foundation's first unit. "And I want to give back to society all the good that life has given me," said Richard. The foundation's first class consisted of 20 women between the ages of 20 and 50. Grace made sure to teach personal development classes, always sharing her story as an example that it was possible to change your life without losing your dignity. "Girls, I worked for 15 years as a housekeeper, and I was never ashamed of it," she told the students. "Honest work is dignified work. But if you want something different, you can achieve it." The foundation became a great success, helping hundreds of women get better jobs or start their own businesses. Richard found fulfillment seeing the positive impact they were making on people's lives. One Sunday afternoon, Richard and Grace were walking through the mansion's garden when she stopped in front of the bench where she used to rest when she was an employee. "Richard, do you remember the first time we really talked?" she asked. "When you defended me from your cousin. That day I started to see you in a different light," said Richard. "I remember thinking I had never met such a kind man," said Grace. "And I thought I had never met such a courageous woman," said Richard. They sat on the bench and looked at the house where they had built their love story. "Grace, there's something I never told you," said Richard. "What?" "In those days when I was pretending to be paralyzed, when you thought I was asleep and would talk to me softly, I heard everything," said Richard. Grace turned red. "Everything? All the prayers you said for me, all the secrets you told thinking I couldn't hear. All the times you said you loved me," said Richard, stroking her face. "You must have thought I was a lovesick fool," said Grace, embarrassed. "I thought you were an angel that God put in my life to teach me what true love was," said Richard. Grace kissed him softly. "Richard, can I tell you a secret?" she asked. "Always. During those 15 years working here, even when you were married to Vanessa, I prayed every night for you to be happy," said Grace, "even knowing that your happiness didn't include being with me. And now? Now I pray every night giving thanks because our happiness includes being together," said Grace, smiling. Richard embraced his wife and looked at the mansion where he had pretended to be paralyzed to discover who truly loved him. "Grace, do you know that pretending to be paralyzed was the best thing I've ever done in my life?" he said. "Why?" "Because it made me discover that the person who truly loved me was here all along, taking care of me in silence, respecting my limits, dreaming of a love she thought was impossible," said Richard. "And it made me discover that impossible dreams sometimes become reality," said Grace. When the sun began to set, they entered the house hand in hand. The mansion remained the same, but now it was full of true love, mutual respect, and the certainty that they had found their soulmates. Richard looked at his wife preparing dinner in the kitchen, humming softly as she always did when she was happy, and smiled. He had tested the love of the people around him by pretending to have a disability, and discovered that the real disability was not knowing how to recognize true love when it was right in front of him. Grace looked at Richard helping her set the table, treating her like the queen she had always dreamed of being, and silently gave thanks for having waited so long. She had loved in silence for 15 years and discovered that true love always finds its way, even when it seems impossible. And so the man who pretended he couldn't walk discovered he had found the woman who made him want to fly. The maid who loved in silence discovered that her employer had become the man of her life. And true love, which had grown slowly and in secret, finally blossomed in the light of day, stronger and more beautiful than either of them could have imagined. End of story. Now tell me what you thought of this touching story about Richard and Grace. Do you believe true love can blossom even in the most unlikely situations? Leave your comment telling us if you've ever experienced or know someone who experienced a similar story. Your opinion is very important to us. Don't forget to leave your like to help the channel grow and subscribe so you don't miss other stories that will touch your heart.